Well, good evening to everybody. I'd like to once again invite anyone who might have a hard time seeing the screen. If you want to move, you definitely can. I'd like to start off by asking a question, as we usually do, a discussion question. And so that means I need some input. I want to hear about your family traditions. Maybe it's something you did as a child. Maybe you still do it. I want to hear about traditions that your family held dear, or maybe you held dear, and maybe you observe them still today. Anybody? Go ahead.
It was a big deal for my sisters and I to sleep on the couch on Friday nights. So that Saturday morning you can wake up and we would watch Saturday morning cartoons and build forts with all the couch cushions and sneak the cats in the house.
Wow, okay, so every Friday night you and your siblings would sleep on the couch and then wake up Saturday morning and watch cartoons and build a fort. That sounds great. Great tradition right there.
Every year at Thanksgiving around the table, we would tell the same story. And now we do it again.
So you tell the same story over and over again.
Over and over, and everybody knows it's coming when we all laugh and have a great time. And now it's kind of a joke, but we do the same thing every year.
Does anybody else have a Thanksgiving tradition that you hold near and dear? I know my family, it's football. We've got to play football, even if it's just throwing it around. If we didn't at least play catch with a football, then the Thanksgiving was ruined. That's for us. Anybody else? Any other traditions?
Good.
At Christmas time, especially when we had the grandparents and everybody together, we would open our gifts from the youngest to the oldest. Each one would open one at a time, and sometimes that would take quite a long time. But it was fun. We could see what everybody was getting.
Chris's family does that. And yes, it does take a very long time. I wasn't used to that tradition growing up. Ellen?
We started about 10 years ago, we have a Thanksgiving book, and each Thanksgiving, all those who come sign in with their famous for the year. So it's no fun to look back and
A Thanksgiving book where you sign in and you write down what you're thankful for that year. That's a great tradition. All right, traditions are a very good thing, right? Do we agree with that? They can be. There's the key. They can be a very good thing. They can also be a bad thing. At what point does a tradition become bad? And any answer is fine. That's a tradition. I like that tradition. Some people don't, though. What else?
We want to go biblical when it becomes unscriptural, and you think that what you do, 3 songs for prayer, that's not in the Bible. It can be changed.
So, church traditions, they can become bad, they can become sinful when we start viewing them as more important than God's Word. That's in essence the meat of what we're going to be talking about tonight, where Jesus has to deal with people who view tradition as, in some cases, more important than God's Word. We'll look at that in just a moment. But before we do that, let's go ahead and turn to Mark chapter 6, starting in verse 53. Mark chapter 6. So we're racing toward Act 2 of Mark, and we're still in Act 1. We're still asking that question of who is Jesus. But at this point in Act 1, I would say that question has been answered very well and in a very profound way and a very final way. And yet, the people, especially the disciples, don't quite get it yet. And that's a motif or a theme of this gospel that's becoming more and more important as we go through. So you're going to notice it tonight that the disciples just aren't getting certain things. Last week we saw that with the walking on the water. Right after Jesus walks on the water and speaks to them, we're told that they were hard of heart, and they didn't understand it, and they didn't understand the loaves and the fish. They didn't understand the feeding of the 5,000. So even Jesus' closest followers, they're just a little bit dull, is the idea. They're hard of hearts. They don't quite understand things yet. And at least this is how I view it in the Gospel of Mark, we're seeing that come to the forefront, that theme, that idea. And when we get to Act 2 is where it'll really be, let me put it this way, every story in Act 2, in essence, deals with the lack of understanding of the disciples. Or one other theme, but we'll talk about that when we get closer to Acts 2. Let's go ahead and look in chapter 6, starting in verse 53. I'll go ahead and read here till verse 56. It says, when they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored on to the shore. And when they got out of the boat, the people immediately recognized him and ran about the whole region and began to bring the sick people on their beds to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he came, in villages, cities, or countryside, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and implored him that they might touch even the fringe of his garment. And as many as touched it were made well. So they're in this region of Gennesaret. It's on the western side of the Sea of Galilee, close to Capernaum. You would be forgiven for mistaking this area with another region, which we've already read about earlier in Mark, which is the region of the Gerasenes or the Gergesenes. There are a lot of different ways that they pronounced it. But that area is east, on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. And it's an area where there were Gentiles. There were non-Jewish people living in that area. And what story did we read about in that region, the region of the Gerasenes? You guys remember? Legion, the man with the many demons, the guy who was out there among the tombs and had chains on him and he was naked and he was wild, where Jesus healed him. And how did the people of that region respond? They sent him away. They wanted nothing to do with Jesus. Well, this area on the western side, they have a completely different response to Jesus, don't they? They are flocking to him. Anywhere, I love the vision, even though it's a quick couple of verses, and there's not necessarily a lot of application, at least, that preachers would normally preach from. But in these verses, I think we see a great example of desperate faith. People who want to make it to Jesus, who are desperate to come near him. They're begging him just to touch his clothes because they have complete faith that will heal them. Now, as I was doing research on this class, I came across an article online that took the similarity between these two names, the Gerasenes and the Gennesaret, and the article was titled, "Which are you? Which are you like? Are you the ones turning Jesus away, or are you flocking to him?" I think that's a good message for all of us. These people in Gennesaret are a great example to us. Any thoughts on just these few verses? We're kind of shooting through those to get into kind of the meat of chapter 7. Any thoughts before we do that? All right, let's go ahead and look at chapter 7. Verses 1 through 23, we'll start off by reading the first 5 verses here. It says, "Now when the Pharisees gathered to him with some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem, they saw that some of his disciples ate with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands properly, holding to the tradition of the elders. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And there are many other traditions that they observe, such as the washing of cups and pots and copper vessels and dining couches. And the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, 'Why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?'" First thing we should notice is that these Pharisees and these scribes, more specifically, are many of them are from Jerusalem. What does that mean? Or what would that add to their clout? Would that add to their authority according in the eyes of the people? Yes, probably it would have. They probably held more clout. They were probably used to people deferring to them more often, and as the Pharisees were anyway. And yet Jesus, of course, he's not intimidated by that at all. But I want us to notice also in verses 3 and 4, in the ESV, those verses are in parentheses. I'm not sure every other version, but in the ESV, verses 3 and 4 are in parentheses. And the idea is that Mark is telling us this story and then pauses for a moment to explain some of the backstory. He pauses, and again, as we've talked before, if this is Peter in a sermon, preaching to a Roman audience, it would make perfect sense why he would do that. Because he's talking about this tradition that the Pharisees have, and then it would make perfect sense that Peter, in that moment, would pause, looking at his audience, and realize, okay, most of you probably don't know what I'm talking about, and then would delve into this explanation of sorts. And it's a very clear explanation. It is only found in Mark. But I want us to go into a little bit more depth in our explanation. Every generation before the New Testament had wise rabbis. They all had teachers who would give their commentary on the Old Testament, on the Torah and the other writings. They would pass along these teachings through oral tradition. Now, eventually, after Jesus, those traditions were written down and collected into what's called the Talmud. Who here has heard of the Talmud? Okay, it's basically a Jewish commentary for the Old Testament, but it's held in very high regard. And it's the same way with the Pharisaical teachings, with these wisdom commentaries that they would pass along verbally. They would repeat these laws and these explanations of the law over and over again to the point that they became rote, that they became like the law itself. And it was often called building a hedge around the law or building a fence around the law. So the idea there is, just imagine there's a line on the floor that if you cross the line, you are sinning. You're breaking the law. And so let's say there's a line that everyone needs to stay on one side. They can't cross over or they're sinning. Well, the idea of building a hedge around the law or building a fence is that the Pharisees would come along and they'd draw another line that's further away. So somebody give me an example of just a law that we don't want to break. Anything. Do not murder? Okay, so we have a law. Do not murder. That's maybe not the best example for this illustration, but let's try it. Do not murder is the line that the law puts forth. If you were a Pharisee and you were trying to make sure no one murders, where would you draw the line further away from murder? No knives, no guns. Okay. No knives. Okay. There we go. That's an illustration. Yeah, they would write a law that says no knives or no swords. That's a good, okay, we've got one. That's a good illustration. They would write a law that's not in the actual Torah, that's not actually in the Old Testament. But after it gets repeated over and over again, suddenly the viewpoint of the Pharisees, the viewpoint of the religious leaders who are in charge, they view their line as the law. And that's the problem, is they're building a hedge, but in reality, they're building their own law. Now, some actual examples of what they would do, for example, the Sabbath day. We know on the Sabbath day, they were not to work, they were to rest. How would the Pharisees go in and draw their own lines on the Sabbath day?
Well, they made a bunch of rules. You can only walk so far.
They
I don't know what it was, but it's not very far.
Yeah, they would go in and write their own rules on how far you could walk, how much weight you could carry. They had a list of everything that was work and everything that wasn't work, and they were adding their own. Again, these were their interpretations of the Sabbath law, but their interpretations were becoming law itself. And so they would look down on anyone, and they would rebuke anyone or punish people who didn't follow their law. This is building a hedge. This is building a fence, and this is not, it's not okay. It's not okay. Yeah.
I think, they have good intentions.
Yes. It always starts off with good intentions, doesn't it? And I think that is an important distinction to make, that most of these laws, they did start off with good intentions, but over time, they develop into strict rules and strict laws, and then they begin to be used in ways that are completely antithetical to godliness. For example, they would use these laws, the Pharisees would use these laws in order to prop themselves up and to condemn other people, to make themselves into a higher class of society so that they could look down on everyone else. And so you're right, a lot of these commentaries, a lot of these laws, they did start off with good intentions. And we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but let's just go ahead and get right into it. That is a sobering reminder for us, is it not? That we can do the same thing. We can draw our own lines, and we can build a hedge around the law just the same way they did. And it might start off with good intentions, but if we start to view tradition as more important than God's word, we're doing it wrong. Does anybody have an example that they'd like to bring up?
On the particular street that I live on, every Saturday, I see this family walking down the sidewalk going north, and later in the day you'll see them walking back going south. I think this stems out of driving. You can't drive on the Sabbath. You don't see that any other day of the week. So they have finally got that to be a sin if you drive your vehicle on the Sabbath. Clear cut.
Yeah. I'm not aware of all of the different rules that Orthodox Jews have today, but I do know that it varies, and that some would say you can't drive on the Sabbath. I have heard that before. All right, let's go ahead and keep on. Did somebody have something? Sorry, go ahead.
In order to say, there are certain activities that only married people are to engage in. Therefore, a church that I used to go to, no dates if you're not double dating. Like, you can't go on a date unless you're going on a double date with another couple. Okay, so
That's a good example. So, is the line drawn with good intentions? Of course. We want to stop people from having premarital sex. So we have chaperones, or we have people double date. But the moment we start acting as if that's God's law is, again, the moment we're going too far. And I think it's important for us to note that I think there's a really good moral basis for individually building your own hedge around the law, but you have to be very careful that you're not speaking where the Bible is silent, or that you're not adding to the law of God. So we might have personal rules that we're not willing to cross ourselves, like let's say we decided, we don't want to ever double date, or we don't ever want to, date with someone unless there's a chaperone involved. That's a fine rule that you can set up for yourself, but you can't hold it on other people. Any other comments on that?
Talks about abstaining from every form of evil. And then man starts defining what those forms of evil are. And
Yeah,
We need to allow God to be the one who defines it, right?
If you want to talk about us, there have been a few conversations about what people ought to wear to church. There are conversations about what you may or may not do in the church building. The argument would be made, there's nothing sacred about our building, it's just a building, but we can't do that, or that in the building because it's a church building. I mean, we would, so I obviously, if you really want more, let me know.
I know, I feel like
We're all trying to be a little careful. We don't want to go too far because we know there are certain issues that will maybe offend people. But we should realize that this is a very true temptation for us right now, that this is something we deal with as Christians on a maybe not daily basis, but this is something we deal with and we need to be ready to watch out for. Because there are different ways in which we, even in the churches of Christ, build hedges around the law, and we need to be careful that we're not adding to the law of God. Jesus was very strictly against this. So we kind of got ahead of ourselves a little bit. Let's go ahead and look again here in verse 6. In fact, actually, before we do that, let me give you one more note. In verse 4, it says, "And when they come from the marketplace." Mark here, or Peter, however you look at it, the author is writing, he's giving us explanations of different traditions that the Pharisees had. One of them is that when they came from the marketplace, they would have to wash. Can anybody guess why that would be so important to them? Why was it so important for a Pharisee to wash after coming from the marketplace? They're out there among things that are unclean. What would make those things unclean?
what types of
People are in the marketplace. Yeah, the Gentiles were there. There seems to be, at least one of the commentaries I read, believes that they would wash when they came home from the marketplace because they were afraid of being defiled by Gentiles in the marketplace. It was all about making sure they were separate, that they were better, that they were undefiled, unspotted from the things that, the wickedness that's out there. And this is an important thing for us to understand about how they viewed sin, how they viewed corruption and defilement. It's a very external viewpoint. And the way you stay undefiled is by avoiding the germ of sin. It's by avoiding, the contamination that's out there. That's how they viewed it. And I mean in a very almost literal sense, almost very physical sense. They viewed it as, that's why it's a physical washing that they're so, they're up in arms about. Let's go ahead and read verses 6 through 13. "And he said to them, 'Well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. You leave the commandment of God and hold to the tradition of men.' And he said to them, 'You have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to establish your tradition. For Moses said, Honor your father and your mother, and whoever reviles father or mother must surely die. But you say, if a man tells his father or his mother, whatever you would have gained from me is Corban, that is, given to God, then you no longer permit him to do anything for his father or mother, thus making void the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down, and many such things you do.'" So Jesus calls them hypocrites, and then he has two main points that back up this claim or this accusation. The first is he quotes from the prophet Isaiah. He quotes from Isaiah 29, verse 13. And in that passage in Isaiah, the prophet is speaking against the people of Jerusalem, especially the leaders of Jerusalem, right before they were taken into exile. Once again, Jesus does this a lot, but he's once again comparing the Pharisees to their ancestors, to the people who rejected the prophets, to the people who murdered the prophets. He does this quite a bit. He's drawing a comparison between the Pharisees and the people of old who rejected God. And this would have been very stinging to them because they thought of themselves they thought, oh, if a prophet came around, we would know. He would come and be our best friend. He would come to us first. And Jesus is telling them, no, you're just like the people that came before. You think you're so much better. And in other places, Jesus tells them, you're the ones who murdered the prophets. And it's very condemning, obviously. But his second point is really a practical point. First, he gives the Old Testament scripture, but then he gives a very practical, everyday occurrence of their hypocrisy. And in this case, it's this idea of shouting, or this idea of claiming Korban. Anybody want to talk about that? Anybody know what this is, what Jesus is basically saying here?
It is in parentheses.
It says that is given to God.
So Korban means it's given to God. So the idea here is that you're a Pharisee, you've got a lot of money, and you've also got a couple of parents who are older and they need taken care of. And Jesus is saying, many of you are not helping your parents financially because you're saying, oh, sorry, my money's given to the God. It's going to the temple. It's vowed as a contribution or a donation to the temple. And Jesus is saying, you're taking one of the 10 commandments and ignoring it. Honor your father and mother. You're not just ignoring it, you're breaking that commandment with another commandment. You're taking one thing that's good and using it to break another commandment. I find this, I think I know the tone Jesus would have said this in. Because that's despicable. It's really horrible to take one good thing, to take a good commandment and use it for evil, right? It's not a bad thing to donate money to the temple. It's a good thing. It was a good thing for them to use their wealth in that way. But they're using this as an opportunity to deny their parents help and breaking one of the 10 commandments in the process. And Jesus says this is just one of many examples, which is really sad. This is just one of many examples that he could have brought up. Is there a modern day equivalent to this? Are there times that we might use something that's good as a get out of jail free card for another commandment? Can anybody think of anything?
Men love to take scripture out of context and use the parts that fit their current position and use it against others and ignore all the other verses that support, contrary to what they're trying to teach.
Very true. People like to cherry pick from the scriptures. And I think one of the biggest examples is when Jesus says, do not judge. And they'll use that as a get out of jail free card for anything that they're doing that's sinful. Now that's just one example. What are some things we might do as Christians? I thought of a kind of a small example, but I think it was the best I could think of. And that is, let's say we're on our way to Wednesday night Bible class, and someone who we know, a friend or a close family member or even a neighbor, asks for help in some regard. And we say, sorry, I got to go. I got to make it to Bible class. We're taking something that's good and we're using it as an excuse to get out of something else. Anyway, that was the example I thought of, but there are many others. And we have to be careful that we don't do this. It's a heart problem. And that's what Jesus is going to talk about here in just a moment. Great transition. Let's go ahead and read, starting at verse 14. Verses 14 through 23. And he called the people to him again and said to them, "Hear me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him, but the things that come out of a person are what defile him." And when he had entered the house and left the people, his disciples asked him about the parable. Let's pause there for a moment. Is what Jesus said a parable? Jesus says there's nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him, but the things that come out of a person are what defile him. Is that a parable?
Says it is? Did you say?
I say yes, he's stating one thing, he's going to compare it to something else. He's laying two things alongside one another, one a common practice that everyone would understand, another the matter of the heart. And if a parable is to lay two things alongside the other, then I would say, in that sense, it's a parable.
Okay.
By the strictest definition, he is laying two things next to each other, so it is a parable. I just found it very interesting that this is, of all the parables for them to take him aside and ask him about, this is the one. And it's almost as if, to them it's a parable, but it really shouldn't be. It shouldn't be so confusing. And I think this is just a more of that emphasis on the dullness of the disciples. It's being brought up here. And again, we'll come to the forefront a little bit later. But Jesus says to them, verse 18, "Then are you also without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile him, since it enters not into his heart, but his stomach, and is expelled? Thus he declared all foods clean. And he said, what comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." So Jesus is presenting a completely different way of viewing defilement or purity. The Pharisees, their view was very physical in nature. You got to wash your hands, you got to wash your clothing and your copper pots and everything else, and you got to make sure you're not defiled by the germ that's out there. Whereas Jesus says, no. What defiles someone comes from within that person's heart. And the reason why the disciples were so dull in understanding this is because this was radically different from how Jews viewed things. This was radically different from how the Pharisees had taught it over the years. And we look at it and we might think, how could they not get this? This is Christianity 101. But we got to remember that they were in a different era and a different time with different beliefs and viewpoints. And a lot of the Jewish practices of keeping oneself unspotted from the sinful world, a lot of that was very physical in nature, where it involved a lot of cleansing rituals. And so we should be a little bit easy on them, I think. Now, I do want us to notice, before we talk about that anymore, in verse 19, there's another instance of parentheses. And this one is once again only found in Mark, where there's just a little note from the author that says, "Thus he declared all foods clean." If you believe, like I do, as I kind of went through at the very beginning of this class, that Mark is a collection of sermons by Peter, the apostle, while he was in Rome, then this verse stands out to you. Because not only is he, taking a moment to say to his Roman audience, by the way, all foods are clean, it also comes with a particular power if it's coming from Peter's lips. Why is that? because he's the one in Acts chapter 10 who had a vision given to him by God that told him that foods were clean. And of course, that vision was more about the Gentile inclusion. But I just think it's an interesting little note there that it's only in Mark's account where this statement is made. Thus, he declared all foods clean, in parentheses. Any comments on that? All right, let's talk a little bit more about this new viewpoint Jesus is bringing up. He gives us a very sobering list of things which defile someone. And I want us to notice right off the bat that many of these, if not all of them, are outward sins. They are sins of action. For example, this is the New American Standard up here because he says, that translation says deeds of greed, wickedness, deceit, indecent behavior. The word for sexual immorality there is the Greek word porneia, which generally speaking should be read as literal. All of these, almost all of them at least, they're not only thoughts, they're not only sinful thoughts that go through our mind, they're also actions. And so the idea is that sin, it starts inside, it starts in the heart, and then it expresses itself outward. It expands itself into how you live. So my question then would be, where is the actual problem? When someone's living a sinful lifestyle, where is the problem? It's in the heart. Where does the problem get fixed? In the heart. It has to go back to the heart. It has to start in the heart. And I think this is I think this is what, for example, John the Baptist was talking about when he said, he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit or with fire. Now, there's different ways to view that statement made by John the Baptist, but given the context, where right afterwards, John the Baptist, he says, the axe is at the root of the tree, and you're going to be cut down and thrown into the fire. Because of that context, I tend to think that when he says you'll be baptized with fire, he's talking about punishment, eternal punishment. I don't think he's talking about Acts 2 with the Holy Spirit coming down in flaming tongues. So I guess my point is, a lot of times when we view John's words there, we take it to spiritual gifts and miraculous gifts, when in reality, I think he's talking more about the Holy Spirit which comes in baptism and that cleansing of the heart. It starts in the heart. There was a problem with the heart which Jesus is now introducing to the world, and he's the only one who can come in there and fix it. Does that make sense? Any comments, questions on that? Might have gone a little too much into an aside there, but hopefully we get what I'm saying. It all starts in the heart. Instead of this outward defilement, it starts within. Any other thoughts on this list before we move on? All right, we've already talked a little bit about the dangers of tradition. Are there any other thoughts on tradition as a whole before we look at one more story? We've got 5 minutes left. Any thoughts on tradition? He needs to wash his hands. Are you adding to the law? No. Okay, let's go ahead and look at one more passage, verses 24 through 30. I'm going to do my best to shoot through this. Let's go ahead and read it, and then we'll discuss. Starting in verse 24. And from there he arose and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered a house and did not want anyone to know, yet he could not be hidden. But immediately a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Yes, Lord. Yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And he said to her, "For this statement you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter." And she went home and found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. All right, there's a lot we could talk about, but I'm going to try to be as succinct as I can be. There are a lot of people who do not like this story. There are a lot of people who would malign it, and in fact, just a month ago, a guy who professes to be a Christian kind of gained some traction online by claiming that this story shows that Jesus is a racist. That was his claim. And he gained a little bit of traction because it was a very inflammatory statement and a very blasphemous statement. So a lot of Christians came out against it, and of course a lot of people, in other words, it got a lot of eyes. And I think it's important for us to understand this story and be able to refute such a viewpoint. If you were to come across someone who said, "Look at this, Jesus is a racist," what would you say to that? How would you respond? Have you heard that before? That's a new one.
Himself, he came for the Jews first. It's in the text.
In this particular passage, this story is found in Mark and Matthew. But in
Mark, he does say first, and that's a key distinction. He doesn't say he didn't come for the Gentiles. He says he came for the Jews first. Let the children eat first.
I would just say, Jesus didn't just come to do a bunch of miracles. His miracles were done in connection with his messianic identity. And so we don't have him leaving Galilee terribly often, though it does happen on occasion. But if he's going to be doing something, as for example in Samaria in John 4, although that's a different gospel, it's going to be because the people understand who he is and what his mission is. Because he came only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, I think it says in the Matthew account.
right.
But when Jesus says to her, "For such an answer, you may go," the answer reflects her understanding of the basis under which she can ask Jesus for help. She's recognizing, and it's, I think in Matthew, he recounts, it says what great faith she has, because it's a demonstration that she understands her hope for receiving something from Jesus is on the basis of him being the Messiah of the Jews and receiving the leftovers of that ministry. And so I think that's what's happening in the interchange between them. You know, that's what she sees that gets her the miracle.
Very well said. I'm not going to try to repeat all of it. But there is certainly, we should know that this woman understands who he is, at least to a degree. And she has faith in him. We often leave out the part that faith plays in miracles, but we shouldn't. These miracles are not just proof of Jesus' power. They're also proof of the faith of those who are being healed. Now, with this particular, I just want to go into a couple of particular details before we end it. One of the things that was said recently by the guy who came out and called Jesus racist is he said that when Jesus talks about dogs here, he's basically calling the woman a racial slur or a derogatory term. And any amount of, you can Google this yourself and look, there's a website called blueletterbible.com where you can look this up yourself and see that that's a fallacious lie. It's simply not true. There are a couple of terms, sorry, we don't have time for all this, but there are a couple of terms in the Greek that are translated dog. This particular one is kuarion, or kune, I forgot how to pronounce it, kunarion. And this particular word means little dog, could mean lapdog. It's very interesting because the Jewish people, they viewed dogs as kind of gross animals. They weren't pets to the Jewish people. But the Syrophoenician people actually did keep dogs as pets. So it's almost as if Jesus is using an illustration that only she would understand, and not really the Jews standing around, if his disciples. So he actually uses the term little dog. It's purposefully a gentle word. It's only used in the New Testament in this account and Matthew's version of this story. There is another term for dog, which is used quite a bit in the New Testament. And this word, it is a little bit more derogatory. And it's generally spoken of about people who've rejected God. If it's used as a metaphor for people, it's people who've rejected God. It has nothing to do with race, and it has nothing to do with gender, which some people even try to bring that into the text. It's just not there, okay? They're purposefully misrepresenting the text. Jesus, by using the first word, is being purposefully soft in his language. He's not calling her a dirty dog or anything like that. He is simply giving this metaphor of a family with a pet, and the idea is that the children eat first. There's an order to this. And we would talk more about this if we had time. I'll leave it to Richard if he wants to say more next week. But I think it's important for us to be aware of some of the false teachings that are out there right now. This false teacher, he got a lot of press, and he got a lot of eyeballs. I think the reason for that is because the enemy of God loves this kind of thing. And atheists, they love to see Christians making fools of themselves. And so they're going to prop up videos like that instead of videos that actually contain the true message of God. And so we just need to be careful and be ready to discuss these things with anybody. Any questions or comments on this? All right, let's go ahead and... Oh, go ahead.
Well, he was referring to her people when he said, use the term little dog. But you could say, what about when he called his own people sheep?
Well,
Actually, you're on the verge of a very good point with how he uses the term dog in other places. For example, Paul will talk about dog. He uses the term dog, the derogatory term for dog, and he's talking about Jewish people when he says it. Jewish people who were rejecting the gospel. And he says, watch out for the dogs. It's not a racial thing even slightly. It's about, that term is being used about people who've rejected God. I do want to say one more thing about this woman. I think she's an amazing example of humility and faith. Faith because she saw who Jesus was, and she recognized that, and her humility recognized that she didn't deserve anything from him, just like no one deserved anything from him. She recognized that because she was humble, but she had enough faith to realize that the grace of God was big enough that it could encompass her as well. I think that's what she's saying here when she says, even the dogs eat the crumbs. That your grace, Jesus, is so wonderful, it's so expansive that it can encompass me as well. I think that's an amazing statement of faith, and no wonder Jesus commends her for that. He was testing her all along because he knew she had that faith. Let's go ahead and close out in a prayer. Dear Father, God in heaven, hallowed be your name. Lord, please help us to speak the truth in our world today. Lord, help us not to be afraid to fight against false teaching. And Lord, we pray that you will correct the hearts of anyone who would blaspheme your name or your Son. And Lord, please help us to never do anything remotely close to that. It's in your Son's name that we offer this prayer. Amen.